All right, good afternoon. Welcome back. Our guest today, who is joining us online, is Angeli Achrekar, the Assistant Secretary General of UNAIDS. She'll be joining us virtually to discuss the launch of the 2025 Global AIDS Update entitled AIDS Crisis and the Power to Transform. For those of you who don't have it, there's a report and QR codes in the back if you want to take a look at it. Tomorrow will be Friday, but it will be a busy day. At 11 o'clock, there'll be a briefing by Arafat Jamal, the UNHCR representative in Afghanistan. He will join us virtually to discuss the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. Then at noon, my guest will be Carl Scow, who is, you know well, the Deputy Executive Director of the World Food Program. He will be here in person to brief you on his recent visit to Gaza. Also on Monday, I want to flag that Monday is July 14th. In addition to being Bastille Day, it is also the day that the Secretary General will be here to launch in person the Sustainable Development Goal Report 2025. He will be joined by the Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed and our Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Li Junhua. That will be at 12:45, just after the briefing. I do expect the Secretary General to take one or two questions before leaving the Deputy Secretary General and Mr. Lee to answer questions on the report. A number of you, in fact, a large number of you, have asked me questions about our reactions to the sanctions imposed by the United States on Francesca Albanese, and I can say to you that the imposition of sanctions on special rapporteurs is a dangerous precedent. Francesca Albanese, like all other special UN human rights rapporteurs, is an independent human rights expert appointed by the UN Human Rights Council and reporting to the UN Human Rights Council. Special rapporteurs do not report to the Secretary General. He has no authority over them or their work. That being said, member states are perfectly entitled to their views and to disagree with reports by special rapporteurs, but we encourage them to engage with the UN's human rights architecture. The use of unilateral sanctions against special rapporteurs or any other UN expert or official is unacceptable. Turning to the situation in Gaza, and you've been asking us about the dire fuel shortage in the Gaza Strip, and I had promised you an update, and I can share one with you that was given to us by our good colleagues in the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and they tell us that yesterday a UN team managed to bring in about 75,000 liters of fuel from Israel into the Gaza Strip. This is the first such provision in 130 days. As we mentioned yesterday, we and our humanitarian partners need hundreds of thousands of liters of fuel each day to keep essential life-saving and life-sustaining operations going, meaning that the amount entered yesterday isn't sufficient to cover even one day of energy requirement. Fuel is still running out and services will shut down if greater volumes do not enter the Gaza Strip immediately. One partner, for instance, reported to us this week that in a matter of days, fuel shortages could cut off supplies to clean drinking water to about 44,000 children that depend on that water source. This just would further increase the risk of the lack of fresh water will only further increase the risk of waterborne illnesses such as cholera, diarrhea, and dysentery. Meanwhile, the Israeli military continues its operations across the Gaza Strip, including shelling and ground incursions. This morning, people waiting to get nutritional supplements were reportedly struck in Deir el-Balah. According to Al-Aqsa Hospital, the attack resulted in dozens of casualties, the majority of whom were women and children. In a statement issued a short while ago, Catherine Russell, the executive director of UNICEF, said she was appalled by these reported killings of 15 Palestinians, including 9 children and 4 women, who were just waiting in line for nutritional supplies for their children. And I can tell you that we yet again condemn the killings of civilians in Gaza. OCHA stresses that parties are bound by international humanitarian law to prevent such excessive death and injury of civilians in the midst of a war. All parties must take all feasible precautions to avoid and minimize civilian harm. Indiscriminate attacks and are strictly prohibited. Another strike today reportedly hit the offices of a humanitarian partner in Gaza City. 3 staff were killed. Yesterday, our partners providing education services said that between October of 2023 and June of this year, 626 temporary learning spaces had been established in Gaza with 240,000 students enrolled. About half of those students are girls. However, the partners say that only 299 spaces are currently operational due to the ongoing displacement orders, funding shortfalls, and a host of other challenges. Our humanitarian partners also, including first responders, health workers, and aid workers, continue to deliver food and other assistance under intolerable conditions, and they themselves are facing hunger. A number of our own colleagues are also facing hunger. They also face water scarcity and threats to their personal safety, just like everyone else in Gaza. As we've said time and time again, this catastrophic situation must end. A ceasefire is not only urgent, it is overdue, and all of the hostages need to be released unconditionally and immediately. Turning to the West Bank, our humanitarian colleagues there report and continue to warn of the intensification of operations by Israeli forces in northern areas. These operations are causing massive destruction, driving further humanitarian needs and dampening hopes of thousands of displaced families that they will be able to eventually go back home. Meanwhile, attacks and harassment and intimidation by Israeli settlers against Palestinians have become a daily reality, including a settler attack on July 3rd that led to the displacement of the Mujarrachat East Bedouin community in the central West Bank. This is the 9th community to be fully displaced in Ramallah and Jericho area since January 23, following the recurrent attacks by Israeli settlers. Turning to Lebanon, this morning in southern Lebanon, our UNIFIL peacekeepers faced aggressive behavior by a group of individuals. During a patrol in Sector West, several individuals blocked the peacekeepers and began throwing stones at them. Our peacekeepers were forced to use non-lethal smoke grenades to disperse the crowd. The Lebanese armed forces then arrived on the scene and the situation was brought under control. As a reminder, any attack against peacekeepers is a serious violation of Security Council Resolution 1701, and we call on the Lebanese authorities to bring the perpetrators to account. Yesterday, UN peacekeepers also discovered 2 unauthorized weapons caches in Sector West, including 3 tunnels containing non-operational military cannon, as well as operational rockets and explosives. The day before, UNIFIL also found unauthorized ammunition boxes in Sector East. All of these caches were referred to the Lebanese armed forces for disposal. In southern Lebanon, also continuing there, our UNIFIL colleagues report military presence of Israeli defense forces, as well as air and ground activities, including in the area of Kafir Kila. Yesterday, peacekeepers observed 11 IDF activities in their area of operations. Our UN colleagues continue to impartially monitor and report on violations of Resolution 1701 and support the parties in fulfilling their responsibilities under the resolution as mandated by the Security Council. Moving to Ukraine, the humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, the UN humanitarian and resident coordinator for Ukraine, Matthias Schmale, says the overnight strikes by the Russian armed forces in the capital Kyiv caused several civilian casualties. 4 districts were hit during the attacks, damaging residential buildings, a clinic, and a TV channel facility. An outpatient clinic was also destroyed. Meanwhile, authorities also report civilian casualties following missile and drone attacks across the country. In the Donetsk region, 9 people were killed and 10 were injured with damage to nearly 70 homes in 20 towns and villages in the area. The regions of Kherson, of Kharkiv, and Zaporizhzhia were also impacted with reports of additional casualties and damage to civilian infrastructures, including ambulance and health facilities. Overnight attacks also struck 4 more regions in Cherniv, in Suny, in Poltava, and in Kropyvnytsky, as part of the continued pattern of widespread strikes beyond frontline areas. Humanitarian teams provided psychological support, hot meals, and repair materials. And for its part, our UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine today said that June saw the highest monthly civilian casualties in 3 years in Ukraine, with 232 people killed and 1,433 injured. In its monthly update on the protection of civilians, the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine notes that last month, the Russian Federation launched 10 times more missiles and loitering munition attacks against Ukraine than in June of 2024. Virtually no region of Ukraine was spared, regardless of the distance from the front lines. Our UN Human Rights colleague in Ukraine also said the figures for June confirmed last year's worsening trend, with 6,754 civilians killed or injured in the first half of 2025. This is a sharp 54% rise from the corresponding period last year in 2024. Also today, the UN Children's Fund said around 70% of children in Ukraine, that's 3.5 million children, now lack access to basic goods and services, including adequate food or shelter. According to UNICEF, a third of Ukraine's children live in homes without functioning water supply and sewage, and nearly half of them lack access to an area to play at home or outside. Turning to Sudan, where the situation is not getting better, and our humanitarian colleagues tell us that the country's cholera outbreak continues to worsen. Tom Fletcher, our emergency relief coordinator, today allocated $5 million to support the urgent response efforts. The new funding will allow us to scale up time-critical health, water, sanitation, and hygiene activities to help stem the further spread of cholera. However, more resources are needed without delay. Humanitarian partners require 50 million United States dollars to sustain cholera response operations through the end of 2025. Our humanitarian colleagues warn that the outbreak is being fueled by ongoing conflict, mass displacement, and the collapse of public health and water systems. Since July of last year, Sudanese health authorities have reported more than 84,000 suspected cases and over 2,100 deaths across 17 of Sudan's 18 states, with upwards of 33,000 cases recorded this year alone. However, our partners on the ground warn that underreporting may be masking the true scale of this cholera outbreak. More than 33.5 million people, including 5.7 million children under the age of 5, are at risk of cholera. Our humanitarian colleagues say that Khartoum, Al Jazeera, and Gedaref and White Nile states account for more than 70% of all reported cases. Khartoum alone has reported more than 23,400 suspected cases. The outbreak is now expanding to Darfur, with cross-border transmission reported into Chad and South Sudan. OCHA warns that the ongoing rainy season, which lasts through October, threatens to worsen the crisis by contaminating water sources and driving further infections. It's critical that donors and the international community step up and urgently scale up financial support to prevent further spread of this deadly disease and to save lives. Turning to Somalia, where humanitarian colleagues say that clashes in the towns of Mokokori and Hiran, in the Hiran regions in the center of the country, have intensified since last week, displacing thousands of civilians. 6 health facilities in the area have suspended operations due to security concerns, cutting off access to essential healthcare and emergency services for thousands of vulnerable people. Continued fighting has also compromised water sources and supply routes, significantly increasing the risk of malnutrition and disease outbreak among displaced population. Our humanitarian partners and local authorities are working to verify how many people have been displaced. Always silence your phones. 6 health facilities in the area have suspended operations due to security concerns, cutting off access to essential healthcare, as I've said, to thousands of people. Continued fighting has also compromised water sources and supply routes, significantly increasing the risk of malnutrition, disease outbreaks among displaced population. Our humanitarian partners and local authorities are working to verify how many people have been displaced to assess options on how to best deliver assistance. More than 58,000 people have been forced to flee because of the armed conflict between the government forces and non-state armed groups in Hiran and Middle Shabelle region since January. And a couple more notes, one from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where peacekeepers have established 2 mobile operating bases in the villages of Ofe and Bakuvutu in Jugu territory in Ituri in the east. These mobile bases will help peacekeepers to respond quickly to local threats posed by armed groups in the area. The deployment will remain operational until mid-July and are parts of Operation Utor Bumi, which was launched in March of 2025 to help strengthen local security and support broader mission objectives, including by providing protection for quick impact projects such as rehabilitation of local administrative offices in Ofe and support the outcome of recent dialogue between armed groups that we've been telling you about. In North Kivu, suspected members of the Allied Democratic Forces carried out attacks on the 7th and 8th of July in 2 locations west of Eringeti, resulting in the deaths of 6 civilians. The peacekeeping mission condemns these acts of violence and continues to deploy patrols in ADF hotspots to facilitate the freedom of movements of civilians and access to farming areas. And our support mission in Libya strongly urges all parties in Libya to refrain from using force, particularly in densely populated areas, and to avoid any action or political rhetoric that could trigger escalation or lead to renewed clashes. The mission continues its effort to help de-escalate the situation in and around the capital city of Tripoli and calls on all parties to engage in good faith towards this end. The UN mission urges the swift implementation of security arrangements developed by the Truce and Security and Military Arrangements Committee, which the mission continues to support. Forces recently deployed to Tripoli must withdraw from that city without delay. Lastly, a report released today by our friends at the UN Environment Program finds the annual heat-related deaths among older persons have risen by an estimated 85% since 1990s. The report recommends proactive urban planning that prioritizes age-friendly, resilient cities with reduced pollution and improved accessibility. UNEP also recommends expanded green spaces to safeguard this vulnerable population who form an increasingly dominant part of the world population. Edie, and then Gabriel.
Thank you, Steph. On fuel for Gaza, you mentioned how much got in yesterday. Did the UN try again today to get in more fuel? And did anything happen?
No, there's no new fuel. We keep asking and we keep wanting for more fuel to get in, but no new mission is going on today. Gabriel. Yep.
Thank you, Steph. Does the Secretary General support Francesca Albanese on a personal level?
Look, I think the Secretary General respects the work of all UN human rights rapporteurs. Their work is extremely important. It's an extremely important part of the human rights architecture. This is his point, is that targeted unilateral sanctions against UN officials, against UN experts, which Ms. Albanese is, are just unacceptable.
And has the Secretary General sent any communique or anything?
I don't know. We're in the process of answering a letter from Ambassador Shea. Javier.
On the same issue, Steph, did she plan to come to New York, Ms. Albanese, in the coming
I don't
weeks?
know. You'd have to ask our human rights colleagues.
If she comes, will she be able to enter the country and to access the United Nations to brief the Security Council?
I mean, the access to the building is not an issue. Access to where the UN office is, in this particular case in New York, is has to do with the United States. They grant the visas. The U.S. There is a host country agreement in which they are bound to facilitate the travel of UN officials, experts, and diplomats, just like headquarters agreements that we have in other places where we have headquarters. Benny, then Ibtisam.
So a couple of questions. First of all, Albanese. There have been some condemnations by other countries other than the U.S. of her work as anti-Semitic, including France, which you mentioned in the context of July 14. Does that enter into the calculation of the unacceptable line?
Look, the Secretary General is not in the business of commenting on the work of the special rapporteurs. They're independent. Those mandates are given to them by member states. Special rapporteurs, as I told Gabriel, have an important role to play in the human rights architecture. If member states are unhappy with the work of special rapporteurs, and frankly, if you look at the series of special rapporteurs who have country-based or thematic-based mandates, there are a lot of member states who are not happy with one or different special rapporteurs at different times. That's their right. But our message is engage diplomatically with the UN human rights architecture and don't issue targeted sanctions.
On another topic in your chronicling of West Bank issues,
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I missed that because I was like looking at something else, but did you mention today's murder of an Israeli in Gush Etzion?
It's not in my reporting, but I can tell you that we condemn the killings of all civilians, whether they be Israelis or Palestinians.
You did talk about violence by settlers, but this was violence by anti-settlers.
And
So
if I can refer you back to the various regular reports by senior officials to the Security Council, violence against civilians is routinely condemned, whether it's conducted by Israelis or Palestinians.
Oh, yeah, but you talked today, not in various reports. You talked today about
I'm just telling you,
violence, and you do as you do every day,
right?
But you
and
failed to mention this one.
Well, I think that's the one thing you and Abdelhamid will agree on is I failed to mention everything that can please either one of you. Ibtisam.
Thank you. A follow-up on Albanese. The Human Rights Watch issued a statement on this issue, and I'm going to read one line in which they say UN and ICC member countries should strongly resist the U.S. government's shameless efforts to block justice for the world's worst crimes.
This is Human Rights Watch or UN Watch?
Human rights.
Human rights. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I've switched gears then. Okay. Thank you.
Human Rights Watch. So in their statement, they also say that that government should strongly resist the war and condemn the outrageous sanction on Albanese. So I guess my question here, the following: these attacks on Albanese they are not isolated. There were attacks against UNRWA, attacks against Navy Pillay and her committee, any human rights, even UN human rights, are not able to get visas to Israel international staff, etc. So what and if you remember also, Israel actually declared a few years ago 6 Palestinian human rights organizations and human rights and humanitarian organizations as terrorist organizations. And yet we have constantly the reaction from your office, yes, you don't agree with these steps that taken by US or Israel, but there is no clear public condemnations?
Well, I mean,
and what are you doing? What is the Secretary General going to do to protect Albanese and Nabi Pillay and all these human rights workers for the UN?
With due respect, I think what I read out today was pretty clear. I'm not going to disagree with the points, the examples that you've raised, but let's take a step back and look at the attacks on the UN human rights architecture across the board. There are a lot of countries who face country mandates who don't allow their special rapporteurs to get in. We had the case of Venezuela not too long ago that expelled our human rights colleagues. And I think this folds into what the Secretary General referred to 10 days ago when he spoke about the Charter, and saying that it was really unacceptable for member states to have an a la carte approach to the Charter, to have an a la carte approach to the UN's human rights architecture, which was not drawn up by Antonio Guterres. It was drawn up by member states themselves. All of these member states have put their signature to this system. Engage with it, work with it. That is our message. Yes, sir.
Hi, Steph. So reports have come out that the intergovernmental organization BRICS is increasingly trying to challenge the US dollar and the US-led economic order, to which President Donald Trump publicly responded by threatening to impose tariffs on any state that allies with or complies with this bloc. My question to you is, has the Secretary General been in contact with any lead officials of BRICS since their recent summit? And does he view their attempted expansion as beneficial or harmful to international peace? Thank you.
Secretary General was at the BRICS summit, as you well know. It's not the role of the Secretary General to get involved in payment systems and all those things. But I think his message has been very clear. We do not want to see more divisions in the global economic system, in the global trade system. Again, as for human rights, there is a global trade architecture that was created by member states. Use that, work with it, and ensure that it is fair to all. Abdelhamid.
Thank you. Albanese put a report to the Human Rights Council. It's called From the Economy of Occupation to the Economy of Genocide. Mm-hmm. In fact, it mentioned a number of companies like IBM, Microsoft, and others who are helping Israel with committing this war of genocide. Does the SG feel that what these information are valid and it should be highlighted and he should express his concern about these companies?
Look, it is, I mean, it doesn't need the SG to be highlighted. I think it's getting quite a lot of coverage as it is. Again, the Secretary General is not going to be drawn into commenting on the work of these independent rapporteurs. I think his message to the private sector, as it always has been, is that the private sector has a critical role to play in ensuring that human rights are respected in their day-to-day work.
Thank you. My second question, 82 Palestinians were killed in the last 24 hours. And by the way, the man who was killed in Atzion is a soldier and is not a civilian. I'm sorry to say that, but I have to say. Okay, but 82 Palestinians, including those who were lining for food near the GHF. So now the number had reached over 57,700 Palestinians killed and 137,000 wounded. You normally remind us of the numbers. Why? I
mean, with all due respect, I talked about what happened today. I talked about the children that were killed waiting to get nutritional supplement. We condemn their killing. I convey to you the information that I have. Alex.
Thanks, Steph. Firstly, on Iran, is there any progress between Iran and IAEA on the Iran nuclear issue?
Please call Vienna.
All right. Secondly, quick follow-up on Ms. Albanese. So just to make it clear,
Sorry, go ahead. Let's go.
On Ms. Albanese, as
Yeah.
for now, we don't know what the consequences of these sanctions will be, right? Is it correct?
Well, my understanding from what I've seen publicly reported is that she will not be allowed, unlikely to receive a visa to come to the United States.
Can I have one more?
Oh, please. Yeah.
Russia's Lavrov met with Secretary Rubio today. Have any comments on that?
As you know, my standard comment, we always welcome dialogue.
Thank you.
Excellent. Evelyn, did you have a question?
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead.
I have a couple questions. First of all, Miss Albanese, I have read every single word she's written. I find her full of errors, anti-Semitic.
But
And
what is your
I'm
question?
sorry,
What is your question?
Yeah, so my question is, I don't see how anyone who's such a bad researcher and has no nuances can be admired. And secondly, on Russia, does Russia give the United Nations any explanation of how killing innocent civilians will help their conquest of
I
Ukraine?
think if you're looking for member states to explain their position, I would encourage you to read what they tell the Security Council. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I didn't understand your answer.
What I'm saying, it's not, I mean, I think the Russia, like other countries, explains its position when on debate on Ukraine in the Security Council. So I would encourage you to read what they say. Yes, ma'am.
I think following Albanese's report, the UN did receive a lot of response being called, like including Google co-founder Sergey Brin called the United Nations transparently anti-Semitic in response to the report. Does UN have any response to
Well, I can
those
tell you,
comments?
I speak for the Secretary General, and I think his record on speaking out against anti-Semitism is unimpeachable. And from the time he's been Secretary General to his previous roles, including as Prime Minister of Portugal. It's okay. Don't be sorry, because I know you're not. But go ahead.
It's not, I mean, there is a lot of conflating of criticizing the government of Israel and anti-Semitism, especially from those who criticize, especially who are not happy with different organizations, including actually Israeli organizations, who are highlighting the human rights violations in Israel, and etc. So, does the Secretary General believe that criticizing the government of Israel is anti-Semitic? And when are you? Yeah,
I think people need to have the intellectual bandwidth to separate anti-Semitisms from legitimate criticism of the actions of the government of Israel. Linda.
Thank you, Steph. Apropos of Albanese, is there any information we can get in terms of, you alluded to, many countries don't cooperate, or a number of countries don't cooperate with UN rapporteurs. They don't let them into the countries, et cetera. Is there any way, maybe a press conference or some kind of a briefing rather, to get a sense of really the level of cooperation by nation states around the world towards these rapporteurs?
I mean, listen, we can ask our human rights colleagues, and I think your colleagues in Geneva can ask the question, but I think you could pretty quickly look at all the country mandates that special rapporteurs have given to them by the Human Rights Council and see how many of those special rapporteurs have been allowed to visit the countries they're reporting on. And I think that number would be pretty low. Abdelhamid and then Benny.
Thank you. I hope you will be patient with me. Two questions. One, the settlers today conducted a wedding inside Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron. Is that a civilized?
I'm not aware of that specific case, but I think we've spoken extensively about the issues of settlers.
My second question, is the SG worried about the world we live in when a superpower tries to impose its vision on other countries? Like President Trump asking Brazil to drop the charges against Bolsonaro. He asked Israel also not to try Netanyahu. He imposes sanctions on UN officials and ICC, Albanese, and many others. What kind of a world that the SG can
Well, I mean, I think, listen, if you look at the SG's recent comments, as I alluded to Ibtisam, his view on where the charter is and the respect for the charter is, I think you can draw your own conclusions. And I think if you look at most of his General Assembly speeches and how they start, they don't really start by painting a rosy picture. Speaking of rosy pictures, Benny.
Very rosy today. Steph, so I know that you make this distinction every time we talk about this issue, saying these are independent rapporteurs and have nothing to do with the Secretary General. But, you know, I mean, people outside this room and everywhere else say the UN says, and then quote Albanese.
Yeah.
So is is the Secretary General concerned that the image that Albanese, I mean, you refuse to talk about the content, none of your business, but is he concerned that that reflects on the UN in the eyes of most people in the world who are not in this room?
We trust you and all the other journalists to explain what the UN is and what the UN is not. And let's face it, you know, we have on one hand the world's most recognizable logo, but by design, no brand management. So many people can speak with the UN logo behind them or in front of them. The SG has the authority, or the non-authority that he has is given to him by the charter. And we hope that people take the time to truly understand that when they're not happy about the UN, they actually target the criticism of which part of the UN they're not happy about. Are they not happy about the special rapporteurs? Are they not happy about the legislative bodies of this organization? Are they not happy about the Secretary General? Let's be precise.
But he also has a very able spokesman, as far as I know, who isn't it also part of the, for the better word, public relation of the UN, not only to explain that she is not part of the Secretariat, but also to opine on what she actually says. Because everybody says the UN says.
I trust that I try to do my job to the best of my limited ability, and I hope you all do yours in helping the global public understand the UN better. Ephraim, and then we have to go to our guest who's been extremely patient.
I have a very quick one also on Ms. Albanese. Is it safe to assume that the Secretary General, if he had heard her say anything anti-Semitic, he would call her out on it and condemn her?
The Secretary General is not in the business of grading or commenting on what special rapporteurs
But if it's
say.
anti-Semitism, he would not just let it pass, right? Because
He has been very outspoken on the issue of anti-Semitism. On that note, I would ask you to please stay and join us to greet our patient guest, who is here to present the global UNAIDS report. So thank you very much for your patience. And if we could put the guest up on the screen. Angeli, thank you. And again, we apologize. Well, I'm not going to apologize for them. They asked too many questions, so it's not my fault. But please, you go ahead, and then we'll turn it over to questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's always a pleasure to be with you all. As was mentioned earlier, I am here today to share with you the news related to our release today of the 2025 Global AIDS Update Report, entitled AIDS, Crisis, and the Power to Transform. In this report with data, we show the latest progress, peril, and promise of the global AIDS response. In terms of progress, let me start by saying that the data that we share, the predominant data that we share in this report are from the end of December 2024. Just before the sudden collapse in late January 2025. And what we see with the latest data by the end of 2024 is remarkable progress. Since 2010, new infections have been reduced by 40%. AIDS-related deaths have fallen by over 54%. 4.4 million children were protected from acquiring HIV since 2000. The report details one of the most successful public health responses in history, saving nearly 27 million lives and showing what's possible when the world comes together in solidarity. Right now, we show that 31.6 million people living with HIV, or 77% of all people living with HIV globally, are on life-saving treatment. This is extraordinary progress. And what we saw by the end of 2024 is that the end of AIDS as a public health threat by 2030 was indeed in sight. Let me shift and talk to you about the peril that we see and that we articulate in the report. There has been a sudden, abrupt wave of massive cuts and weakening of aid consensus from the single largest HIV donor, but also other governments all over the world since January 2025 and onwards. And what's happening is that it's putting the entire global HIV response in peril. All that progress that I just mentioned is at risk. We have modeled in this report and show that if the world does not act to mitigate and really ensure that there is continuity of support and resources for HIV prevention and treatment efforts, an additional 6 million HIV infections and an additional 4 million AIDS deaths will occur by 2029. What this means is that we will return to the late 1990s and early 2000s when the epidemic was at its deadliest peak. So the end of AIDS by 2030 with figures like that is simply impossible. This shattering impact is being made worse by a global backlash against rights, laws, and policies needed in wider society to end AIDS and sustain the progress over time. For the first time since UNAIDS began reporting, the number of countries criminalizing key populations had increased. Bans on same-sex relations are now in 64 countries and sex work in 168 countries. This dangerous trend limits access to HIV prevention and treatment services, and again, makes the progress of getting to end AIDS and get that response back on track even harder than before. We want to close, though, and we showcase this in the report, that there is indeed promise. We are seeing incredible promise and power to transform. In the hardest of circumstances, the HIV response is adapting. Communities that are facing cuts are showing extreme resilience, and they are the bedrock of the HIV response. Governments in the global south are rising to the challenge. We are seeing that in 25 of the 60 low and middle income countries that were included in our report, these 25 countries have indicated that they are increasing their domestic budgets and their focus on self-sustaining their HIV responses in 2026. This is a promising sign. We're also seeing that there are new technologies that exist, new innovations that exist now that never had before. For example, we're seeing phenomenal new tools, a suite of long-acting HIV prevention medicines that are already coming to market with injections just twice a year that are nearly 100% effective at preventing and stopping HIV transmission from occurring. The HIV response was forged in crisis, and it was built to be resilient. We need and are calling for global solidarity once again to rebuild a nationally owned and led, sustainable and inclusive multi-sectoral HIV response. We're calling on all countries and communities to seize this opportunity through crisis, because the end of AIDS is in sight and we can get there, but it will require global solidarity. With that, I will stop and turn back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let us go to questions. Let me start with Edie.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. A couple of follow-up questions. What's the status of research on an AIDS vaccine? And secondly, what? I don't know what's happening. Anyway, in terms of the upsurge in countries criminalizing activities that cause AIDS, what does UNAIDS say is the genesis of this? Why is this happening now? And in terms of the model that you use to project the deaths by 2029, who's doing this modeling? Is it your own data experts or what? Thank you.
Thank you. Shall I take these questions or take additional questions if there are some in the room? I'm happy to take these questions. Thank you so much, Edith, and really appreciate the questions that you have. And let me give you the responses. First, on the status of the HIV vaccine, we are not there yet. We still do not have a vaccine, and we still do not have a cure for HIV and AIDS. And it's a very complicated, the virus continues to mutate. It's a very complicated vaccine to develop. There has been active research going on that to find a vaccine, but we do not have one yet. The closest thing, as I noted, the closest thing that we've got, and this is very, very recent, is the long-acting injectable pre-exposure prophylaxis that is here, and we are hopeful that that will also be used for treatment in the future. But that is the best that we've got at this point. Treatment for people living with HIV that are, of course, infected with HIV, and routine continuity of treatment daily is critical to suppress the virus. And when the virus is suppressed, it is untransmittable, often referred to as U equals U. That's the best that we have right now, which is why we're trying to push as hard as we can, and we, to roll out, closing both the treatment gaps, but also trying to roll out this new innovation, the long-acting injectable PrEP. What stands in our way of rolling that out right now, while we continue to wait for a vaccine, is accessibility. We need to make sure that the prices come down, the volumes go up, and that everyone in need of this long-acting injectable is able to access it. And that's going to be our biggest challenge right now. In terms of the upsurge of criminalization that we're seeing and the genesis, why now? This has been something that has been stigma and discrimination, criminalization of key populations, LGBTQI populations, gender-based violence, for example. These structural issues continue to persist and have been there undergirding the HIV response in a way that has prevented both prevention and treatment scale services from scaling up. Why now? Why, there continue to be stigma and discrimination against this sexually transmitted disease, against people who use drugs, against men who have sex with men. And these discriminations are fueling the criminalization of people that need to be served and of the response. In terms of the modeling that I shared, we have an incredible team of data scientists within UNAIDS that works with data scientists across countries, as well as within universities. And together, led by UNAIDS, we've come up with this model. The model takes into account the impact that would be had if US government PEPFAR were to cease for all treatment and prevention. And this is what the model shows.
Oh, I think we lost your audio.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
I'm not sure where I dropped off. Were you able to hear my response on the modeling?
Yes, we heard most of it. I think we lost you the past, let's say, 5 seconds.
The last thing we heard you say was that that was the modeling if the U.S. government, if PEPFAR were to cease.
To cease its support for prevention and treatment services. And as I noted earlier, one of the biggest challenges that we've been seeing since January of 2025 is that prevention services all over the globe have really slowed down or come to a screeching halt. We now see 1.3 million new HIV infections yearly. But these are also prevention services that, I mentioned the country governments stepping up resources for their own HIV responses. Oftentimes prevention is the last thing that is prioritized, but we will never be able to turn off the tap of the new infections without focusing on prevention as well.
Thank you. So let me do Evelyn, Linda, and then you, and then I'll go online.
Thank you. Evelyn Leopold, Dag Hammarskjöld, Fund for Journalists. What's the reason given why PEPFAR was abolished, or is it abolished totally?
So PEPFAR, as you know, is one of the most remarkable bilateral efforts ever. The U.S. government, through its funding through PEPFAR and the Global Fund, contributed 73% of donor international funding into the global HIV response, launched by President George W. Bush in 2003, and has continued on even during the first Trump administration, but across both Democratic and Republican administrations and across Congresses, has been one of the most successful public health endeavors ever. The current Trump administration was taking a look at all of its foreign assistance and reviewing its foreign assistance to ensure that their foreign assistance aligns with the America First agenda of the Trump administration. They PEPFAR has not been abolished because the Secretary of State, Secretary Rubio, even during the review of the foreign assistance funding and efforts, issued a waiver, as you may know, a waiver to continue life-saving treatment, comprehensive treatment services. So PEPFAR continues to be supported. The extent to which it will continue in the future, we don't know. Where and geography-wise and the scope, we're not sure. We are cautiously hopeful that PEPFAR will continue to support both prevention and treatment services. And that's what we will wait to see what happens. But the other key piece here is focusing on transition and sustainability. And this is something that the US government and through PEPFAR has been focusing on before the Trump administration, working with UNAIDS and with country governments to really make sure that these remarkable HIV responses are sustained by countries into the future. This is something that we are calling to governments, including the US government, to make sure that that baton pass happens methodically, happens thoughtfully, and in a way where that planned transition can happen so that the gains are not eroded or abolished into the future.
Let me go to Linda.
Thank you. Linda Fasulo, NPR at the UN. My question is about statistics. I mean, clearly you've said that the US provided 73%, which is quite astounding. So today, who are the other top 3 donors? So we're saying that this is primarily a Western program supported by Europe or EU and by the US. Are there any other non-Western countries that contribute in any kind of substantial way? I know you mentioned that there are 25 countries now that are increasing their local support. Can you expand on that a little? Thank you.
Sure, thanks. And that's a really critical question because, you're right in that when the world needed somebody to step up in the HIV response at the height of the pandemic in the late 90s, early 2000s, the US did. The US led with strong support and quickly. And that was really critical at the time of the emergency. Now, what we're seeing is that, more and more of even European countries are stepping out of the global HIV and global health response and into other areas. One of the things that we think is really important, both for sustainability of the response, is to fulfill the promise that the world made, the promise of ending AIDS as a public health threat by 2030. That's all countries, right? European countries, donor countries, but all countries from the global South and the global North. It's in terms of the 25 countries that we're seeing starting to increase their own domestic resources toward HIV and AIDS. I want to reiterate the fact that what's really incredible is countries like, we just launched our report in South Africa. Countries like South Africa, they fund over 75% of their own HIV response with domestic resources. Other countries are similar, Thailand, Namibia, not at that level, but still, countries are from the global South as well, funding their own responses. The extent to which they are it's never going to be at that level of funding that the US and other donors had brought in. But as we think about the future of the response, there are a few things that we need to focus on, both domestic resource mobilization from countries themselves, broadening the net for making sure that there's more global solidarity across other, diversifying investment, right, from other donor countries, but also the private sector, also foundations. And then finally, we also need to make sure that we are working with countries to create models that are much more self-sustaining over time, that are more cost-effective, that are simplified, that countries can afford and can sustain into the long run. So that's that's where we're at right now.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Jennifer Levine, Interpress Service. I have two questions. So the first one is, have countries backed away since PEPFAR has been defunded? Like, has the US's choice to step away spurred other people to do the same? And then the second one is, what does the future hold for the AIDS crisis, do you think, in the near future and then long term?
Sorry, the second question?
What do you think the future holds for the AIDS crisis, short term, kind of best outcome and worst outcome, and then like both short term and long term?
Yeah. So on the first question, in terms of has the U.S. spurred other countries to move aside, sadly, we have seen a weakening of commitment from other donor countries at this time. It's been happening over time, but we've seen acute shifts over time, in these past few months this year. But at the same time, and what we tried to show in this report is that, importantly, we're also seeing countries taking ownership of their own responses as well. We're seeing countries stepping up their own resources. So, we're seeing some countries stepping away, donor countries stepping away, but we're seeing implementing countries stepping up. That is really important in terms of sustainability and sustaining the response. In terms of best case and worst case, let me start with worst case. Worst case is we will go back. Remember, we do not have a vaccine or a cure. HIV is infectious and it's chronic. It's a chronic disease. We will go back to those days where death was on the doorstep. And the worst thing too, of everyone, and the worst thing too, is that if people are on treatment and they go off of treatment and their treatment is interrupted, for example, they go on and off of treatment, drug resistance can develop. That is a real problem. So the cost of treating will go up exorbitantly. So the worst case scenario is a place none of us want to be, which will be, HIV and AIDS, death, new infections, continuing to spread without a vaccine or a cure, with costs that will be exorbitant. And remember, what we have seen because of the incredible progress is life expectancy increasing. Because of this, we've seen economic impacts increasing because of people on treatment. We've seen incredible progress, not just in health, but in economic development, and other areas. So worst case scenarios, we go back to what was at the peak of the epidemic. Best case scenario is that we end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030 and countries sustain over time. But this means we have to bring the world together again, as we did at the beginning of the HIV response. We have to deploy those new innovations that I mentioned so that we can stop those new infections. And we need to make sure that we close those remaining gaps in treatment and keep people living with HIV on treatment. And we still have 9.2 million people living with HIV that are not on treatment, and many of those are children. So the job's not done yet, but the possibility of still getting to the end of AIDS by 2030 is there.
Let me go online. Oh, we lost.
That just means we have to move quickly.
I think we had a question for you online. I think from Vusala.
Great.
Do we have a question online? I guess no. So do we have more questions in the room? If not, well, thank you so much for this very interesting briefing, Angeli. So just as a reminder, we had Angeli Achrekar, who is the Assistant Secretary General of UNAIDS. The full report is obviously online, but at the back of the room, if you look at the table, I think we have the press release and also the executive summary with the information to get the full report online. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for staying. Thank you.